Welcome everyone to another episode of the Inclusivity in Focus podcast series brought to you by the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group of the ESCRS. My name is Artemis Matsou and I'm joined by my wonderful co-host Diana Silva. Hi Diana. And today's episode is particularly special because we're talking about Spotlight Success, Women on the Podium. So in my own experience, stepping on that stage every time can be both fascinating and nerve-wracking. And there have been times that I had to fight my own imposter syndrome and I was very stressed about it. But I think each time I found myself growing stronger through this experience and more confident. And I'm thrilled to explore this topic with three phenomenal women. And I'm pleased to welcome Professor Sorcha Ni Dhubhghaill, who I shall say has a commanding presence on the podium. And I have personally admired her many times for her insightful presentations and the way she engages the audience. Hi, Sorcha.
Hello, Artemis.
And then we have Dr. Basak Bostanci, who is another powerhouse and a very charismatic speaker. And she's an advocate for female speakers as well. Hi, Basak.
Hi, Artemis.
And we're very privileged to have Amy Johnson, who is a consultant and facilitator for Project Implicit. And for those who may not be familiar, Project Implicit is dedicated to addressing hidden biases that shape our perceptions and decisions. And she's doing that through research and education. So her work involves challenging organizational and institutional disparities through data. So hi, Amy. It's our pleasure to have you with us for this discussion.
Hi, Artemis. Thank you.
And as always, we have Kris as well, who's going to step into the discussion as well for us.
You can't get rid of me.
We don't want to get rid of you, Kris, for sure. So shall I hand over to Diana now to start with some questions for our lovely speakers?
Well, thank you so much all for joining us today. And just as Artemis was sharing with us earlier, public speaking definitely is one of the most nerve-wracking experiences, but at the same time, being at the podium, especially as a woman, can definitely change the trajectory of your career. So my first question for our speakers, for Sorcha and Basak, was how do you manage stress and anxiety while presenting? If you can share some of your tips with us, and also how have you noticed that your confidence level has evolved over time? What were the key experiences or the turning points that you felt that definitely changed the way you presented yourself when you have a talk at a major conference?
So, Diana, thank you very much for that question. Quite a big set of questions there. The first thing for me is, how do you handle anxiety or being nervous? The truth for me is I'm still nervous every time. I am still convinced that the nightmare is going to happen. I've been in talks where my slides, for one or another reason, were upside down. It wasn't even an old-fashioned carousel, it was PowerPoint. How does that even happen? So the more congresses you do, the more you realize anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and you have to roll with the punches. So there's no way to be perfect every time, even though we try our best. So what I did when I was originally starting is I spent a long time practicing in front of a mirror to try and see whether if what I was trying to say and be genuine about was actually being said out there. And the only thing is to do it and do it again and do it again and hope they invite you back, because it's practice. It's a muscle. We learn surgery, we learn medicine. We need to learn this too. And the perception that people are naturally good at it can stop us from realizing what we actually need to do.
That's a lovely answer. Thank you so much. And Basak, would you like to share with us your thoughts as well?
Thank you, Diana. So I think I'm what they call the natural speaker. I like to speak. I'm always very, I really enjoy sharing my ideas. But of course, it was very, exciting in the first times when I was on the stage. So I realized that practicing is very important, but over practicing can be also an issue. If you practice more than enough, you got bored of your speech, and then you realize you got dull on the stage, and the excitement level in the audience decreases. So I think there's an optimum times for getting ready for it. But you should be excited when you're on the stage. You should be excited about what you're going to speak about. Even if it's a very dull subject, very boring subject, you should find an exciting, point of it, and you should try to get a connection with the audience and rise the excitement level of the audience. And also getting ready for the speech is always easier when you have a chance to get to know the audience better. So it's going to be different if you're going to talk to students or talk to some residents or talk to real professionals. You're going to, set your level accordingly. So what I always do, especially in the beginning of my, speaking, thing, I always try to practice in front of a couple of good friends. And I always drag them with me to my speech and let them sit on the front rows so that I can do eye connections with them. And this will lower my anxiety.
Yeah, and I think it's actually quite a kind of a different point that you mentioned, like over practicing sometimes can actually stop some of the spontaneity, and therefore then you don't get as connected with your audience. Any tips for raising the energy with the audience and to keep the excitement level? Because oftentimes, just as Sorcha was saying, you have to fight with yourself and you're fighting your own anxiety. You have practiced a million times your PowerPoint and everything like that. But at the same time, you still want to look natural, which you are, which is great. So any tips for actually having that excitement or raising the energy with your audience?
I usually start all my speeches with a question to just raise the, question marks in minds. Like, what would you go ahead and do in this type of patient? Something like that. If it's this if this patient is your mother, what would you do? Something like that will make a question mark in people's audiences, because usually what we have is like 8 to 10 minutes. And, like if you don't make this connection right away, it is really hard to, get connected after the 5th minute. So the first 2 slides, 3 slides is always important. I usually open with a joke, open with a question, and try to, if you are excited about your speech, usually people are. If you find the speech very dull, very unnecessary, they will feel the same way. So it is like you're sharing the energy with them. So I try to do that thing.
I think that's a really good idea. Can I leapfrog on that and say, not only do I love the idea of starting with a question and a joke, I think starting with a vulnerability is also really good. Because what we're trying to do here is be genuine. We're trying to show our genuine passion for what it is that we're doing. And when you see somebody with the self-confidence to say, look at this little mess that I made, and here's how I solved it, that resonates really well with people. Because first of all, it takes a huge amount of confidence to show when we didn't do perhaps the best job we wanted to. But the reality is every surgeon has an off moment, and they'll all connect with that. So if you show your vulnerability, and then you show them, look, in the same situation or with the same problem or with the same dilemma, this is how I got through that. And I think I think it also harmonizes a bit what you were just saying, that you need to make a human connection with people. And you need to avoid reading off a card, because those cards are a barrier between you and your audience. And what every audience wants, they don't want a set of buzzwords that you picked up from TED Talks. They don't want a set of cards in your hand. They want to see that you are genuinely passionate about what you're doing. And if you know your stuff before you go in, and if you show a little bit of vulnerability and then your expertise applied to solving that problem, I think you've got a good crowd there too.
Just, on that point, Sorcha, I think about in February when we were tapped to do the unconference, which was a way of sort of breaking down presentations and things. And, and all of us walked around and asked each other, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to do this? There was this discomfort that we all experienced because it wasn't what we're used to doing, walking up to the podium, delivering a presentation. In the end, it was walking up to a podium and delivering a presentation, but there was this added factor of trying to engage. which
Mhm.
I found particularly challenging on the topics that I had. I mean, normally, it's fairly easy on a clinical thing to get somebody to engage, another clinician to engage with you, but getting clinicians to engage on non-clinical topics is a very different story.
They are like herding cats.
Mm-hmm.
If you do not have something that they're interested in, they're going to wander around and they're going to do their own thing. So the problem is, how do you get them to eat their vegetables?
Yep.
Because there are certain topics that are attractive, video complications, or the bouquet of these, but there are certain things that are needed, like the medical writing class is very popular, but there are certain other, physiological optics and the vegetables we want to feed them. So what we do in those cases is we try and find the person who cares about that thing.
Yeah.
Because when you find the person that cares about it, they just radiate a passion for it. There was a speaker a while ago, wonderful woman by the name of Christina Ersch, who gave a world-changing OCT lecture. And she's a physicist. She was talking about interference waves and patterns. And in 20 minutes, I knew more about the OCT than I had learned in 15 years of just watching them slightly improve the resolutions. So I think once you find the person for whom that means the world, then they show you the world. The problem is we're not as excited about all of those things. And creating the title for your talk that will bring them in the door is another huge challenge. So, I mean, the challenge begins even before the lecture starts. The challenge begins before you make the PowerPoint. It starts with creating an attractive title that will bring the boys to the yard, or that will bring the audience you want to sit in front of you, because there are 25 other sessions of, glamorous video complication things that everyone wants to see. So yeah, it's about finding your genuineness and finding your passion in it.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And those are really very good tips, because we so often want to just be perfect and to present perfectly and to just sound secure, and we oftentimes forget about the connection and the fact that we are actually talking to colleagues and to coworkers, and in the ultimate goal of the presentation is just that we all can learn a little bit from each other. And sometimes I think that our own driving force to just just present perfectly can sometimes stop us from actually thinking more about the connection and the way we are going to present. And also the title is also a very important point, and just the concept of getting people to actually pay attention to you, because they need your talk to actually understand a subject a little bit more. What about how do you handle difficult questions from the audience or challenging comments from the panelists? Because for me, at least, also one of the things that gets me a little bit anxious is actually how am I going to respond if someone is a little bit more aggressive, or if I find an audience that poses some kind of toxic criticism towards my presentation. So do you recall any particular occasion where you faced some tough questions, and how did you handle it?
I bet that's a good one for Amy and her inclusivity role.
Sure, I can answer that. I started by always wanting to persuade someone to my point of view, and I felt like I wasn't doing my job if I didn't convince the person that I was right, or that I had the evidence, or I had the point, or I was smart, or I was competent. So it became very much like a back and forth of me trying to, prove myself, prove that I'm worthy to be there. And as I've matured in my presentations, I have just chosen not to engage directly with an aggressive question or difficult question in the moment. I'm not running for office. I'm not trying to get someone to invest in my business. I don't owe anyone an immediate response. I owe them a thoughtful response. So I prefer to answer in my own time. Does that frustrate people? Of course it does. But so often the tough questions are more gotcha questions, and they're meant to rattle me. They're meant to show off that I know something you don't know. I read an article that you don't know. Let me explain something to you that you don't know. It's allowing the asker to show off or to make you feel smaller I've seen women and other folks, actually get smaller as the question's being asked. They cave their shoulders in, they put their head down, their eye contact breaks. And so in these situations, I draw mostly on my teaching experience, the pedagogical training that I went through as an academic. So I'll rephrase the question to ensure I understand what's being asked. I'm not dodging, I'm listening. I heard what you said, I heard your question. I acknowledge it as being significant, deserving of careful thought. And then I invite the questioner to discuss it with me after the session and say, you know what, I want a moment to think about this. It's such a big question. And so it allows me to maintain control of the situation, to engage meaningful. I still have a back and forth with that person, but it gives me time to gather my thoughts and to respond succinctly and clearly, and ensuring that my answer is well-formed and not emotional, that I'm trying to be defensive, because I found that was my default, was just to say, I'm getting an aggressive question. I can feel it. Like they want to prove me wrong. They want to challenge me. They want to show off. And I would get into, well, I gotta stand up to that person. I don't. I have no responsibility to persuade them to my point of view, and I probably won't in a back and forth on, when they're in front of a microphone and I'm on stage. So I prefer to say, let's talk about this later in a friendly way, not in a, oh, I'm avoiding this. It's just not right now. This is something that you and I can discuss later. And then maybe it comes up as something that's shared in a newsletter or in writing later on with other participants who may also be interested. But I also find that brings people to you at the end of a talk because they want to hear what you have to say. And sometimes it's, let me ask you a few more questions so I can get you an answer. We feel like we have to have an answer because that proves that we're competent versus I know how to get an answer, which I feel like shows that you are a thoughtful and interesting person who has research skills and the ability to hear a question and then find a response.
I love that, actually. I love your approach to that, because indeed, when you find yourself in this position, you become defensive. You're trying to kind of like defend yourself, essentially, if you feel that you're under attack. So answering the question at your own time, the way you suggested, I think that's a very good tip, actually.
I have a funny story. Do you want me to share it with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, actually, this didn't happen to me, but it happened to a wonderful woman from United States that I know of. It was in a refractive session, as much as I remember, and somebody asked a very aggressive question to this woman who was on the stage. And this question was, I am pretty sure nobody in the room knows the exact answer. Okay, so it was a very detailed question about, even if we knew the answer, it wouldn't change anything. But, it was a direct question and the answer should be very specific and nobody knew the answer. So this woman, it was a very international, very important meeting. This woman said something like that. Okay, this is a great question, but knowledge is power and nobody in this room knows the answer. So what we should do is we are going to our homes and read about it. And then we are going to share what we learned. And that was a great answer. Of course, I never had the guts to do this, in my past. But that was a great question, a solution of a brilliant mind. That was very powerful. She was to the point. Knowledge is powerful. Your question is valuable. I don't know the answer, but I bet you don't know the answer too. So let's go and read about it and share what we learned. That's a great answer. What I try to do is whenever I have a very aggressive and, pushing question, I try to keep my positive attitude. I try to always smile. I try not to show that I'm under stress. Rather than giving false, very, strong answers, I try to, make general comments about the questions. And if I know that someone from the panel, it doesn't matter if it's a male surgeon or a female surgeon. If I know that someone from the panel knows more details about this question, I will refer this question to this panelist so that we can solve. So knowledge is power.
Yeah. And Sorcha, have you had a similar experience?
Oh, I remember a few years ago, probably maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, I was giving a presentation about the cornea. And there were some eminent corneal people in the audience. And one of them came like a shot to the microphone at the end of the talk and said, you referred to my paper there, but you weren't quite right about that. You a bit missed the point. And I was like, oh my God. And it was a very subtle thing, but it deflates you like a balloon. Just like, this is just, and they were polite, they weren't aggressive, but it was just like, sit down, little girl. And it really, really undermines you. And it took me maybe 2 days or 3 days to get over what I felt to be a level of shame for my lack of fully understanding that paper. And then what I realized is I understand that paper better. I understand a depth that I didn't know. So either you win or you learn. The problem is just getting through that 72 hours of beetroot red shame because you went out there and you took a hit. But if I had not done that, there's a depth of understanding I wouldn't have picked up from the books, because I read that paper. I at least thought I understood what that person was going for. Maybe I had the bad luck of having the author in the room. Maybe I had the bad luck of that particular specialist always having a comment about something. But I was better for it. I took the hit. And that's really our biggest fear, is that that exact thing's going to happen, that the person is going to say, wait a second, why are you here? But the worst case scenario is people chuckle a little bit, everybody gets over it, and you learn to be better. So at least you get that from it, despite the embarrassment. But yeah,
the pain point.
There was pain.
It's,
I think those experiences, they obviously they build up your confidence, but also they make you bulletproof. When you go out in that stage next time.
I feel like it's one of those moments that either you are bulletproof afterwards or you quit completely. Like, that's really one of those moments. But I think most people at that stage in their career are going to go, the only way out is through, and you just sort of keep working at it. But it is the absolute nightmare. But maybe it's worth reinforcing the realities. Most crowds are lovely. Most experts don't want you to fail. Most people watching your talk are not sharpening their knives to come after you. And if you don't know something, or if something was wildly off, in most cases, they'll approach you afterwards. Rarely it happens, but rarely do people want to humiliate you. You have to be a very small person if that's the way you make yourself bigger. So most of the time, you can rely on the support of the colleagues, not the criticism. It happens, but it shouldn't happen so much.
Yeah. I had an experience where I was at a Congress in Barcelona, and it was in Spanish. So I was being simultaneously translated because I'm not fluent in Spanish. And so 3 very prominent ophthalmologists plopped themselves in the front row, crossed their arms, leaned back, and waited to enjoy the show. And I'm getting feedback from the translator that I'm talking too fast. And so it's just going, sideways in a very, very bad way. And, I've got these 3 preeminent ophthalmologists who are my friends, who are just enjoying themselves to no end, and those are the moments where you think, okay, I'll never do this again. And to be honest, I don't think I've ever gone into a situation where I've been simultaneously translated before, because it is hard. And because it's really hard to set that pace. So yeah, I kind of gave up on that one. You won't see me doing that again, but it makes you stronger every time you have kind of a rough ride when you're presenting.
And I guess it's a learning point every time, obviously, as Sorcha said, you have to kind of like go through these 72 hours afterwards that you feel terrible about it, but at least it makes you stronger, and you learn something. You learn that next time you're going to do it a little bit better. That's very important. I also wanted to ask Amy, through your participation in Project Implicit. So I'm sure you've probably seen many times that there is a lack of female presence in a lot of panels and a lot of conferences. There are not a lot of female voices, and I think things are getting better. But if you look back, it's always like a male-dominated panel in conferences, especially in ophthalmology. I think it's even more obvious there. In our world, like cornea refractive world, is even, it's really, really hard to miss it. And how do you think this affects the female visibility in the profession? It is a challenge, it is a challenge for women that they're not being chosen for those roles, to be out there, to be on stage and have their voice heard. Have you seen that through your research?
Sure. Implicit bias can absolutely limit opportunities for women to speak at conferences or be included on panels. And I should note that it doesn't just affect women who identify, or people who identify as women. but people who are under-recognized based on any, aspect of social identity. And what comes to mind is a study from the early 2000s about how we associate certain identities with, different terms, different categories or attributes. So in this case, we might think about something like, what does it mean to be an expert in your field? So in this particular study, there were just over 100 faculty members from top research universities who were asked to rate a candidate for a lab manager position. And the twist was that the candidates were randomly given either a male or female identity. So they had the same credentials, but a presumed, gender identity that was different. And so what they found is that faculty members rated the male applicants as more competent and more hireable than the female applicant. They offered the male candidate a higher starting salary by a few $1,000s, more career mentoring, and this bias wasn't just from male faculty. Female faculty were just as likely to view the female applicant as less competent. And so the study illustrates how deep-seated and subtle implicit biases can be. Someone may think they're acting equitably, appreciating diversity, being part of the solution, and it challenges the idea the study does that the best person will be hired for the job, or in this case, be invited to a panel. It reveals the biases influence, even when we think what we are being objective. And so one of the main things that I bring up in almost every presentation that I present on behalf of Project Implicit is that I like to think that people don't wake up in the morning and say, who can I discriminate against today and who can be left out of this conversation, right? And yet research shows us time and time again that some people have advantages or opportunities where others do not, based on them being in the more common, more familiar, more status quo, more represented. In the past, this has worked out in our favor to have a speaker who looks like this, speaks like this, is from this university. So our brains just say, yeah, let's go with what's familiar, not what's unknown. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone is more competent, more intelligent, more of an expert. It just means it's easier for our brain to talk us into that. And so if we can be thoughtful about who's being left out, who's not being included, whose voice is not being represented on this panel, it helps us to recognize we didn't do it because we're a bad person. We did it because it's the easier thing to do. It's the default. It's how we've been trained. It's how things have been set up. And so if we think about that really, really carefully when we're planning panels, when we're setting criteria for who we want to be speaking, it's less about having one of each and collecting, a different person that looks different, comes from a different university, having people like Pokemon cards or something, right, to fill the seat. And instead, it's what expertise are we looking for? And then what assumptions are we making about the people that we are bringing onto the panel? If we've seen them speak before and we know that they are an excellent speaker, they hold the audience's attention, they have intelligent things to say, can we ask that person, who was your go-to person? We've had you speak before, we've heard your voice before. Who is your go-to person? And ask them to support, or lift up somebody who is maybe not part of a panel recently, somebody who hasn't been recognized or seen. And so it gives us an opportunity to disrupt the fact that there are people like that who are successful in this setting, and instead say who is being left out, who is not being included, who can we ask to participate as well.
It's something that is getting better, I think, but still there's a long way to go, I guess, isn't it? To improve things.
Yes, absolutely.
And Sorcha, I want to ask you, because you're a council member for ESCRS, and when you sit down and you think of how you're gonna, for example, organize a session and how you're gonna select people for the panel, how do you make those decisions? I'm sure, knowing you, that it's all meritocracy, but do you take into account?
So I think all of us would agree. None of us want to be chosen as a speaker just because we're a woman. We are that, and we are more. So when you have a list of candidates and you're trying to fill particular topics, I'm not sure indeed that it's an explicit choice against women, but what Amy says really resonates with me. It's the path of least resistance. So the first thing they're going to do is see, well, who spoke last time and did everybody like them? So that's going to fill a certain number of slots. And then the next one is, are they famous? As in, are they a KOL? Will they get butts in seats, if I may be honest? And then there's a tranche at the end where you can have either newcomers, new voices, etc. And this is usually where we are trying to see where we can fit in more diversity, because actually we should be reducing some of these long stay characters, because the world moves on, innovation moves on, and, you know, we want to try and keep a fresh but on the other hand, we still want people to attend the Congress and see the speakers they want to. So we've got this flexible zone where we can try and introduce new speakers, etc. One of the best things, best pieces of advice I got from the current ESCRS president, Filomena Ribeiro, was she's like, you need a list of people you've seen speak, people you know can do it, people you know can engage the crowd. Because when it comes to those selections, that decision is made in a room. Everyone's going to pick for the quickest or the easiest rational fit for that. And if you come pre-armed with some killer candidates, these are the people that will be asked again next year because they did it well last year. And if those people are women, well, then it'll just slipstream into the previous. So since then, we've noticed that there have been more and more. The difficulty sometimes is being the only woman on the stage. And then you feel under the impression that you have to represent all female kind. But we're as individual as anybody else. And it's a little bit, you know, additional pressure if you have to feel you have to shoulder the entire side of the gender. But I think I love this idea that the situation is improving, but it has been improving for, I guess, 15 years at least. You know, this in-stream of female medical students, particularly into our field in ophthalmology, just doesn't seem to manifest on the far end of the pipeline. So, you know, we have this mid-career choice making where people either feel that opportunities aren't available for them, the push onto the stage isn't available to them. But I think BOSS is going to be, well, I hope, will be one of these instruments that can actually target that problem. Because we know there are wonderful women. We don't tend to see them in their, you know, late career on the stage telling everybody what they learned, and making the link there is, I really think, probably one of the biggest things that BOSS is for, not only for women, but indeed all people that are underrepresented at the top level.
Yeah, the number of times I get approached by companies for recommendations on female cataract refractive, primarily anterior segment surgeons for the podium. And the list, you have to stop and think. Now, since then, and actually it was Filomena who came to me last year and said, make a list, you know, and so she likes her list. And, you know, so we have a list now, and we know, you know, and every time I meet another really sharp woman ophthalmologist, you know, I add that name to the list and I make that contact and make that connection, because there is a need, and it's not just other women who come and ask, it's, you know, especially the companies, because the companies also have, you know, if you think about our role with BOSS, the companies also have a stated purpose to drive inclusivity. And that's not just within their companies, but it's within their key opinion leader programs, their symposiums, et cetera. And so we can also help diversify and create a more inclusive industry by the work that we're doing, which is pretty cool.
Well, what you say about industry actually is very, very critical, I think, because traditionally, I guess, you know, industry has been more like biased in the selection of those speakers. You know, there's all usually male speakers. And I think now there is a trend. Now they're trying to change that. That's very positive, obviously. And there are so many brilliant women out there. I don't think there's going to be a difficulty for them to find those women. It's just about thinking actively about it. It's not just going, as Sorcha said, with just the previous person on the list. Just actively trying to think of those new people, new faces to go out there. And I wanted to ask, you know, obviously, when you are visible on the podium, it's great as a female, and it can have significant impact on your career growth. But do you think there's any occasion where it actually can make things more difficult for you, especially because you're a female as well? I want to ask Basak actually about that.
You already know the answer, Artemis.
No, I'm thinking about a conversation you and I had in Amsterdam in 2021, Basak. So, so yeah, your experience, yeah.
Yeah. You would think that, like making a lot of appearances on the podium, especially for the, industry, makes you more powerful and people will know you better and people will ask for you to, speak for them also. It's not particularly this way every time. So, first of all, you have to know how you're directing. So you have a power, and what you're doing with this power is very important. Are you going to just brag about, oh, I'm speaking for that and I'm speaking for that? Of course, it makes some people very frustrated because why is she always speaking? There were certain people who are calling the CEOs of the companies and asking why I am, always asked to speak for those, companies. What I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to be humble about this. I know that it is particularly important as a female surgeon to be on the stage because there are many young female surgeons looking up to me and saying, "Oh, one day I will be on the stage and I will be as brave as as brave as her, and I will not be shy to speak up for me and speak about what I am doing in my surgeries, and I'm not going to be shy about this." So I'm trying to make a role for them, set a role for them. But to be honest, it wasn't always a positive thing in my country as a female surgeon to appear more than 5 times, 6 times. And I try to stay away from these arguments and like jealousy, because I knew that if I give my attention to those arguments, this will only keep me low. But all I want to do is rise up. So all I concentrate is, am I doing a good thing on the podium? If I'm okay with what I did, I'm trying to set a role for the young comers.
I think you're doing a great thing on the podium, actually, having heard of you and watched you so many times. And I think, it's a different vocabulary sometimes we use. For example, a female surgeon who, is out there, puts herself out there, is often labeled as too ambitious, whereas the equivalent male surgeon would be, oh, they're too successful, So there's a different vocabulary, different interpretation of how we are perceived, I think. Sorcha, Amy, what do you think about that?
Oh, I think that that's everywhere, isn't it? Because the more senior you become in your role, the more you have these well, I have it at the moment being the head of my department, and I follow up an elderly male head of department. And there was a degree of distance between him and the department, and there was a degree of hierarchy and a degree of, oh, well, you don't bother the professor. Nobody has a problem bothering me. I get bothered all the time. But, this is a little bit how I want to run the system. And we've all had that situation in the operating room where you're like, ooh, are they going to think I'm a B word? But I need this stuff and I need this now. We've all had to negotiate this barrier where you have to show them not only the patients, not only the audiences you have, but you have to show your staff that you are to be respected in the same way that they would a man. And they don't always automatically do that. And for a while, I thought, right, I'm going to read this book about authoritarian leadership styles, and I'm going to go in there and bang my fist. And then I realized I can't do that. It's exhausting. I can only be who I am. So I had to accept the fact that maybe I'm not going to be the distant professor like the old guy, but I'm going to have my own style. And I'm going to be proud of that too. And I'm not going to think it's second best to this older way of doing things. And it seems to be working well. But you're right. What we need to do often comes in conflict of what characteristics worked for a man in the same situation. And we just can't. I don't want us to aim for all of us to be men. There was a joke when we were in surgical training back then saying, if you can just show your certificate that you got your tubes tied, you'll get into surgical training. Otherwise you won't. So, we shouldn't have to be anything other than we are. But again, it doesn't fit in the classical mold. But women like us and programs like this, hopefully will make a little bit of a dent.
That's what we hope for sure. Amy, what do you think?
I don't have the same experience in a surgical program or department, but from a speaker's, showing up to give a talk at a venue, I've noticed how differently I'm also treated, in terms of other speakers, waiting to go on stage quite often. I'm a 40-year-old woman. I have my insecurities about my appearance. And even though I champion fairness and objectivity, I'm also aware of the fact that there are extreme biases related to beauty and age and weight and how I dress and how I comport myself, how I speak. People have remarked about my lipstick, my haircut, my shoes. I look too young, I look too old. How could I possibly be doing this job? I'm in my 20s, I'm in my 40s. And I start credentializing myself. I'll start saying, I went to this school, I did this, I've given talks here, I've given talks there. And again, that same sort of turning point where I stopped answering aggressive questions, it was about the same time when I said, I'm meant to be here. Why would I not be here? I'm allowed to take up space. I'm allowed to laugh and also be stern and also use my hands to speak. And to Sorcha's point, it's not in spite of me being a leader, it's because I can be a leader in my own way. And so, I still internalize those comments, but I've also put up a little bit of a wall there and just said that's someone else's opinion of me and I have no control over that. But that emotional aspect of being a female identifying leader in the way that I look, the way that I speak, the way that I stand on stage has been something I've had to learn and practice and give myself some grace about, because it does take an emotional toll. When you're getting up on stage, the first thing that the male moderator says to you might be, oh, what a beautiful pair of shoes, or I love your lipstick. They don't say that to their male co-panelists, and so that's usually the joke that I've made. It's happened many times. Somebody makes a comment about something I'm wearing, my jewelry, my shoes, my lipstick, and I'll say, I really like, Dr. So-and-so's shoes as well. And then there's a little bit of a, kind of titter amongst the audience of like, oh, okay, she can be listened to, right? She was able to make a joke. She was able to let this go. But it also tells the moderator gently, let's not do that, right? Let's not do that. This is silly. I'm here to talk about my ideas. Or I've said that before. You think my shoes are great, wait till you hear my talk, or something like that, just to kind of like deflate the situation. Because again, I have to remind myself almost every time I go up on stage, and I forget who said it, I'm still nervous every time as well. But I put on my stage presence and I say, I'm meant to be here and I get to take up space. And I get to take up space in the way that I want to take up space. And if you have to fake it till you make it, you do. You take up the space, you make the joke, and you move on, and you do it with a smile, and you do it gracefully. And there's something about standing in that power, that doesn't have to be mimicking someone else's power, but how I want to present, that I found has been really powerful, and it helps me be more responsive to my audience as well. So I'm not worrying about what's happening up here. I'm worrying about how I am acting and how, what I actually have control over in the situation.
I've been known to turn the discussion around to ties. And let's discuss everybody's ties. And that will get them focused very quickly. So it's
but they just don't realize it. It's just something to say.
They
think they're being complimentary, right? And then when you turn it back, they're like, oh, that's pretty dopey. That wasn't necessary. Right. That's the best I can come up with, and so I just deflate, like take the power out of the statement and don't let people see that they rattled you, because they didn't. They can't rattle you. You are absolutely meant to be in that space.
Absolutely.
And I think, coming to that, because we mentioned imposter syndrome, I think a lot of high achieving professionals, women especially, we do have that. And we feel more stressed than our male colleagues when we're on that stage. And I want to ask you all guys, how do you deal with that? How do you, or do you actually feel that you have imposter syndrome, or you've been able to kind of like get over it? How do you overcome it?
I don't think you ever overcome it. I think there's a moment, there's a moment every day, even running my own company, leading a company of 30 people. There's a moment every day where I look over my shoulder, I'm thinking, are they really letting me do this? Yeah. And then you're like, no, wait, it's okay. I'm in charge. And so, no, I don't think you ever get over it, but I also would worry if I didn't stop for a second and make sure that I have my facts straight, that I know what I'm talking about, that I'm confident in what I'm presenting. Because if, the worst thing to kind of Sorcha's point about, that red face check, if you're not up there and you're not credible and you're not then you're kind of fulfilling that imposter syndrome in a way. And maybe we do have to work a little bit harder. I don't know. I mean, at this point, it's part of my nature to present and things. So I don't think about it as much as I used to, but I do know that I'm always prepared. And there are times where I really agonize over the facts in a presentation before it gets done, because I want that information to be crystal clear to the people who are listening. So I personally, I don't think I'll ever shake it completely.
Difficult, isn't it?
What if we challenge the idea that imposter syndrome is real in the first place? Like, we've been kind of gaslit into thinking that we have to doubt our abilities when we feel like we shouldn't be in a space. We like treat it like a diagnosis, right? Oh, you're so capable, you just have imposter syndrome. Or like, we know you're really competent. It's just the imposter syndrome speaking up. And it originated, I think, in like the 1970s, and it just wasn't built with the consciousness of racism and classism and xenophobia and other biases. So we've pathologized that feeling of discomfort and self-doubt, and it affects women. It affects under-recognized social identities as well. But we're like framing a natural response to exclusion as if it's our thing to overcome, with a little bit of persistence and perseverance, and even just taking up space. I would argue that if we can change the systems, change the process, become more inclusive in the environment, we don't have to make ourselves feel smaller or explain it away as something that is an individual shortcoming or like a deficit. We structure meetings so that everyone has a voice. By rotating meeting leadership, no one has to speak up a little more, right? If we use a round robin approach on a panelist or with other panelists, we agree to that ahead of time and say, we're going to answer in this order, then we're going to answer in this order, then we're going to answer in this order, sort of like making a plan. We don't expect it to happen by default. And then we don't have to say women need to speak up, be more confident, say more things. We've actually made the system equitable from the get-go so that we don't have to worry about whether or not people will behave in a way that we would like them to, or in an ideal scenario, right? We assume it's not going to be fair. So can we overcome that and then not put the onus on the person who is female identifying or under-recognized to then like stand up and take up the space? So I'm curious what other folks think about that, because I've been really challenging myself when I feel like I shouldn't be in a space to say, is that imposter syndrome, or is that because I have been historically excluded and I'm feeling that discomfort, and that's not a deficit on my part, it's a deficit in the system.
Amy, that's amazing, because while you were saying that, you were making imposter syndrome a sort of symptom that we can diagnose or treat. Mm-hmm. And actually, if I think about myself, when I've been struck most by imposter syndrome, they've been the moments where I've been stretched the most, or most exposed, or most challenged. And actually, probably if you're feeling imposter syndrome, you're exactly where you need to be, because that's got to be an uncomfortable area where you're only going to grow. So I think I'm going to try and reframe imposter syndrome in my head, going, okay, dang, I'm nervous, but this is a good sign.
I have one recommendation to all my sisters who are feeling, like self-doubt, imposter syndrome, anything. Just get to know your colleagues, your female colleagues and male colleagues. No one will be that lucky to be published just because they are, like women, they are blonde, they are, like tall. If you are getting published, if you are getting, cited by very, like accomplished scientists, if you are on the stage talking about something scientific, not that I did it and it went all right, like if you are credited very well, you deserve your place. And I bet you will have a lot of, female and male, colleagues, but the females are working like twice. They are running a house, raising children, running in the morning and trying to, like put on some makeup, trying to, wear some heels, and at the same time doing some surgeries, be successful at them, being scientific when they are speaking. No one will be that lucky. We deserve that we are. We definitely deserve.
I think that multitasking, Basak, you are nailing it every day. What you just described.
We all are.
I'm sure. Diana, how do you feel actually when you're on stage?
Well, I think imposter syndrome, at least for me, it's something, that I don't have to overcome. According to Amy.
I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying that we can maybe give ourselves a break a little bit.
Yes, I definitely think so. I think that for me, at least, and Sorcha was also talking about that. I usually think for myself that there is power in authenticity. So the fact that I'm not like everyone else, actually, well, it's just that I'm myself. I don't need to be like everyone else. And therefore, even though I may feel that I could be, why am I even here? Why are they inviting me? And all these feelings, for if we analyze them objectively, they're not true, first and foremost, because well, I graduated like everyone else, medical school. I performed at ophthalmology and things like that. So they're picking me because I actually did something, well, not perfectly, but at least that I'm doing well, or that I'm working with people that have led me to opportunities that led me to that path. And I try to think that, I mean, even though I may feel that I'm not deserving of them, because sometimes I do feel them, and I think it's normal that I feel that way. Even though sometimes I do feel like that, I like to think to myself that, okay, I don't need to look like everyone else. I don't need to be someone else. I don't need to be a leader who is an authoritarian. I don't need to be masculine. I can just be myself. And then if people enjoy the way I present and the way I do surgery and the way that I treat my patients, then I'm confident that if I'm doing a good job, it's normal that people actually invite me to work with them and to present at some conferences or to be part of certain groups and things like that. But definitely it's something that, I mean, it's not something that I can say that it's not an issue for me, because I oftentimes get these feelings of self-doubt. But I also think that we should normalize this, in the sense that it's not like some kind of disease or something like that. It's just part of the feelings of insecurity that come sometimes with the fact that you are from a certain gender or a certain minority group or something like that. And it's just normalizing it. It's not kind of just an issue that it's not your problem. It's not something that it's intrinsically a part of you. It's just a part of the way the society works and the stereotypes that exist around certain people and around certain groups, and the fact that sometimes when people look at you, they're not imagining that you are an accomplished anterior segment surgeon. They're actually imagining a man with glasses and things like that. But it's okay, because we don't need to all look the same. We don't need to be like everyone else. We can just be ourselves, try to do a good work, to a good job, and just trust ourselves that we are actually working hard. And because we are working hard, opportunities are coming towards us.
Exactly. I think what you say, normalizing this feeling, because you're just out of your comfort zone when you're out there. It's not like, and Amy said, if we pathologize it, then it becomes like a disease and it sticks to us, and we shouldn't feel this way. No, I fully agree with that, actually. It's just that, I think in people's head, imposter syndrome is linked to underrepresented, unrecognized groups, females or other people, not male usually, or our male colleagues. They usually don't suffer from this, or it's not linked to them specifically, unfortunately. Oh, well, what can we do? Yeah.
Yeah, but
Maybe
I
you all
actually
have the
think that a
confidence
lot
of
of
a
men
goody man.
also suffer from imposter syndrome. If I at least I know a lot of men that also struggle with imposter syndrome.
I think it's
I know it's
generation.
worse.
I'm
I think it's
generational.
worse for women. Obviously, it can be worse if you are a woman or from an underrepresented group, but I think men also struggle with it. And I think that we really should normalize it, because just normalizing that you're not perfect and that there are things that make us insecure, but you have to trust yourself and trust the fact that you are yourself and not someone else, and just work hard for the things that you are asked to do. But I think that the main issue with representativity is that sometimes working hard is not enough. And I think that's where our group and where our creating awareness, these kind of podcasts, just creating a conversation about these things really comes into place. Just the fact that sometimes you can work really hard and then you don't get picked
not
up.
recognized. Yeah.
You don't get
go
the
anywhere.
same opportunities.
Yeah.
It's not something that I feel that I have personally felt, because I think that at least in my trajectory, I've been very fortunate to work with very accomplished surgeons who have provided me with some opportunities, not only in the public hospital I work in, but also in the private hospital I work in. So I don't feel that way personally, because I do feel that I have been very fortunate in that sense. But at the same time, you get the feeling that, well, maybe it could have not been that way. So
True.
Definitely.
And I like how he said that, imposter syndrome is like a gaslighting mechanism. So we need to kind of like think about it. Is gaslighting ourselves. So very strong argument there.
Definitely.
I hear the same thing quite often in conversations with, executives or people who are training managers. They say, we want to be more diverse, but the best leaders that come up the ranks are men. And I was like, well, what criteria are you using? And they're like, well, they're assertive. They're able to take command of a team. They are confident in meetings. They're less timid with their ideas. They have a strong handshake. I mean, stupid stuff like that, right? That we have created what the status quo of leader looks like. And so most of us who live in the cultural soup, the societal soup that we swim around in every day, we've also inherited, even if we don't actually ascribe to those attributes, we've inherited that's what it means to be a leader. And so when I hear people say, how can we help our female identifying folks, our underrepresented or underrecognized folks find their voices, my challenge back every time is they have a voice. You're just not listening. Making sure that people are being heard in how they communicate and not expecting everyone to become like a quote unquote man to be a leader. Maybe you don't speak as loud. Maybe you do take time to come up with a response. Maybe you do plan a task or an initiative differently. But if the status quo has been built with the majority in mind, the historically, the leaders who have been historically chosen time and time again, maybe the status quo is wrong. And it's not about getting the people who don't fit into it to fit into the status quo. And that's where, supportive networks, initiatives like BOSS can provide that space to figure that out. They shake us out of the moments where we tell ourselves we're the problem, that we're not fitting in, we're not doing it right, we have to do it differently. And instead, what if we just lead the way that we authentically lead, and that this is okay? How I show up is okay. And you see other people, other women, other underrecognized folks doing it their way too and succeeding. And we start to, I hate to make it sound like a coalition of, people, underdogs all coming together, but there is something about seeing other people authentically being themselves rather than trying to fit what has historically worked in the past. And we're at this moment where it's really uncomfortable. And so we have to figure out how to overcome it, how to have conversations, how to make it more visible, to make it less shameful to feel, whatever those symptoms of imposter syndrome may be, and say, I'm feeling really uncomfortable. That's because you're growing. I'm feeling really uncomfortable. It's because you're challenging the status quo. It's not because something is necessarily wrong. And if we can change that conversation and be supportive of one another and, still point out where maybe we're going down a wrong path, doesn't mean that we just get carte blanche, do whatever we want. But being able to say, I'm seeing this from a different perspective. Could we try it that way and see what happens? And then having measurements in place, having benchmarks to see, is this as successful? Probably more successful if the research, follows practice. But how can we again, like sort of challenge ourselves to think that the system and the soup that we swim in is more of the issue than us individually trying to, you know, become part of the conversation. I think that's important for us to really think about as the initiative's moving forward too, is how can we be supportive? How can we be thoughtful about this? And how can we make those invisible structures more visible to ourselves and to those that we are supporting and leading?
I have a funny story. About 6 months ago, I was having some real terrible troubles with one of my residents because she was just not like the rest of them who, you know, they're all kind of battled out to get their surgery. They're all sharping up with their answers in the rounds and so. And I was on the borderline of just saying, I don't think this is going to work out. This, for one or another reason, person drives me absolutely crazy. And what I realized is because that particular person is an introvert, female, vegan, just different to the rest of the group, and was having some challenges with it. And somebody by the name of Amy Johnson turned my brain around on that. And now she's one of my best, because what she does that the others don't do is she's methodical, she gets it done. And when she says she can do it or can't, she's being 100% honest. And I was really on the borderline of letting somebody go because they were different. And I can see how easily one can fall into that pattern. But yeah, some implicit bias training actually prevented me from making a big mistake there. She's a strong one now.
Exactly. I think that unconscious bias, it's within us, you know, we have to work on
We
that.
inherited as well. We have to be super careful not to keep the cycle of violence going and just repeating the errors.
Yeah.
Her early weaknesses were apparent, but her strengths didn't bloom until she was confident. And now she is just dynamo. So
She felt safe.
That's actually a great discussion. I really love it. And I'm sure you all ladies are going to be there for ESCRS in Barcelona. Yeah. Because I think we have to kind of like go over that again. It's phenomenal. It's really interesting, this discussion. So I think we're past our time. I want to thank you all. I think you all shared your insights, your personal experiences, your stories. We all learned from that. I think it's extremely important that we all learn from that, and hopefully our audience will learn from that too. And I will really look forward to see you all in Barcelona, out there on the stage. I think Kris has already arranged that for us, so we will all meet on the stage, and we'll get over our imposter syndrome, which doesn't exist. It's just gaslighting. Yeah, we will do that. We will do that. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Artemis and Diana.
Thank you so
have a
much.
very good
Appreciate it.
Bye.